Hi, I'm Shan Wu with the Undercolor of Law analysis of what is really going on with the Trump sentencing in the Manhattan DA's case, supposedly going to happen on Friday. So we had a couple of days off because of a little bit of snowstorm here, and we'll put up the nice picture I took of the snowstorm to give you a good view. And now let's turn to the Trump sentencing. What's really going on? So first, let's ascertain as to what Judge Maran actually has done. He rejected Trump's arguments to dismiss the case, put it off further, and he says that the sentencing will now finally happen on Friday. However, I now put those chances at only 50-50, but let's first address some of the usual bogus criticisms of Maran for even wanting to do the sentencing on Friday. Take a listen here.
This is the worst instance of Stalinism in my 60-year career. You know, Stalin was told, show me the man and I'll find you the crime. And so Letitia James, the Democratic Attorney General, and Alvin Bragg, the Democratic DA, tried to find a crime to convict Trump of, but they couldn't. They couldn't find the crime. They searched the books. They couldn't find the crime. So they made one up out of whole cloth. A totally made-up case. And if they can make up a case against Donald Trump, they can make it up against you, too. And now they're trying to avoid him getting an appeal. One way of avoiding him getting an appeal was not sentencing him. Okay, now they're going to sentence him. There's another possibility. The governor may pardon him. And if the governor pardons him, then he still has the stigma of a conviction. And there's a question about whether he can appeal if he's been pardoned. They're looking at every possible way of avoiding an appellate reversal because any decent appellate court will reverse this conviction.
Okay, so that's Professor Alan Dershowitz, once upon a time a pretty widely admired figure. I don't think that's so true anymore. But what's up with his logic here? Where is the analogy? He's saying this is like Stalin's era. So who is the Stalin here? Where is the Stalin strongman-like plan? There's no unified plan that he's claiming that there's a conspiracy, right? When not one, but 3 different prosecutors in 4 different jurisdictions, 4 different grand juries, made up of citizens from 4 different states, and 4 different judges, 2 federal, 2 state. Where is the unifying theme in the idea that there's lawfare or conspiracy going on? There's none. There's nothing on the part of the prosecution, the judges, the grand juries, these citizens from different places that decided to indict, or of the only jury that actually got to go through with a criminal case that heard the evidence in New York City. They're not part of the plan. It's impossible. You get all these people that are part of some plan. So that's just usual nonsense. And it's kind of sad coming from somebody like Dershowitz to hear him going off on this. It kind of reminds me of Rudy Giuliani sometimes. Now, it may surprise you to learn that I do agree that there's some reason to criticize Judge Maran now about his whole approach to sentencing. Now, let me emphasize, I thought he did a great job of running the trial. Historic, high-pressure situation, did an excellent job with that. Not so great a job of holding Trump in contempt for his really brazen, contemptuous actions where anybody else would have been sitting in jail already just based on his contempt. But he got through the trial, managed the jury very well, but after the trial, it's been kind of downhill. So I think the problem is best laid out by Judge Maran's opinion itself, which we'll put up there for you to take a look at while we kind of analyze it together. So he says that the day of the conviction, he set a deadline of June 13th, a long time ago, with filing of post-trial motions. That deadline passed without any motions being filed. So the court set the matter down for the sentencing date of July, and that date then got adjourned to September 18th as a direct result of the United States Supreme Court decision, which was their immunity decision. So that's mistake number 1. There was no reason to adjourn it until that decision. He had set a date of July 11th. There was no motions pending at that time. He should have just sentenced them right there. So then, of course, that immunity decision comes down, and he decides that he needs to sort of basically consider all the arguments that Trump's people were making based on that decision. That's what they've been hoping for, was the decision that they could use. It kind of didn't matter for them, right? No matter what the decision said, it's a Supreme Court decision. They would have found something in it to bring back to the judge. So mistake number one is even letting the court hand down that decision before you do the sentencing. Then, of course, Trump asks to have the whole thing, the sentencing, postponed until after the election. And so, again, the judge does that. And why? I mean, why would he have to postpone it until then? He talks about that immunity decision causing postponements as a, quote, direct result. But you got to ask why. The decision didn't say anything about the New York case. It did not involve the New York case. It didn't compel Maran to do anything at that point. I mean, that was actually really based on the case in D.C., the federal case. And then he delayed it further until after the election under what rationale? Presumably not to interfere with the campaign. I mean, that's a very poor rationale for delaying it. So then what happens, of course, is after the election, Trump naturally now wants to postpone even further because he's going to be president. He's going to be really busy. And Maran, again, grants more time for Trump to file another motion and even allows him to file, in New York, it's called a Clayton motion, but it's basically a set of requirements that a defendant has to try to meet to get the case dismissed altogether. This is a long time after the jury verdict, a long time after the sentence should have happened. There's no reason at that point to now allow the Clayton dismissal motion when nothing has happened besides the election. So all this did was to give Trump further opportunity to use his newfound position as president-elect to come in with more legal theories that can accurately be called, quote, cases of first impression, unquote. That's an impressive piece of jargon to be able to throw around. It makes it sound like there's something very new, it's a novel theory. And of course here it is accurate because there's never been a former president or president-elect or president in this situation before, so everything about it is arguably a case of first impression. That's why, as a trial court in this situation, you want to make good rulings that are really based in the evidence, spell out your reasons, but you don't want to wait too long because everything's going to be a case of first impression. There's an endless number of legal issues that can be floated for appellate courts. So, Maran had rejected most of the arguments based on immunity, but by allowing it to continue this way, what's happened? Take a look at the screenshot. Emergency stay petition with the United States Supreme Court. Big surprise, right? The lead argument in that request for a stay is that Maran wrongly admitted evidence that should have been excluded under the presidential immunity ruling by the Supreme Court. So an awful lot of things wrong with their pleading, but let's keep it really simple. That is what appeals are for. That's the big problem with seeking the stay of the sentencing, because for stays, you have to show that there's irreparable harm that's going to happen from letting this go forward. The harm that would come from a sentencing is if the sentencing arose from a wrongful conviction, or maybe there's something wrong with the sentence itself, something was done wrong in the trial, it's a bad legal theory, evidence came in, shouldn't have been admitted, whatever. That harm's not irreparable. That's what appeals are for. It gets cured on appeal by a reversal if that's warranted. If the idea that being sentenced was irreparable harm, every single criminal defendant should be able to get a stay to consider further issues before they get sentenced. So that obviously makes no sense. And again, it is an example of there being a special rule for Trump. Maybe not intentionally. It's not like, Judge Maran sitting around going, I really want to give Trump, a bunch of special rules for him. He can't help it. I mean, it's a former president. He's trying to do everything right. He is kind of overthinking this issue post-conviction. One thing in his opinion that really struck me here, at first I thought it was just kind of ridiculous, but I have been thinking more about it. In a footnote, he praises the lawyering as, quote, exceptional by both prosecution and the defense. He may as well have said there are fine people on both sides. Remember that? It was not exceptional lawyering on both sides. There were times when the defense just did a really terrible job They were very brazenly doing inappropriate things, and from a purely strategic, tactical point of view, they did a crummy job at times. I certainly, well, I won't go into it, but I won't retry the case, but they did a crummy job opening up doors for tons of damaging evidence to come through. So what is Maran talking about? Why does he want to be so complimentary here? One could infer that he is concerned about offending the future president of the United States, offending the future number 2 at the Justice Department, offending the future Solicitor General of the Justice Department. Why is that? Well, those are Trump's lawyers. That's what they're going to be appointed to and probably confirmed by the Senate. Look, none of us know what Maran's real thinking is on this. We certainly don't know what it's like to be living in the pressure cooker that he has been living in. And I can't say with any certainty that he's feeling afraid for his future, personal or professional, or that of his family. But I can say this. If he had just sentenced Trump on July 11th, he would have been much less worried. He'd have less to be concerned about. Trump wasn't president-elect yet and won yet. His lawyers were not about to ascend to top positions in the Justice Department. If now he's caving in to worry and fear, that's perfectly understandable. Of course he has a right to be worried. It's easy for any of us to sit back and say, oh, have some courage, Judge, have some backbone, stand up to Trump. This is a judge whose daughter has already been the subject of the president and his administration's criticism. It's a president whose future director of the FBI openly wants to prosecute political enemies. Why shouldn't the judge be worried? In many ways, this lays bare the real stakes of what's happening in the country. That all of us, from former members of Congress, Liz Cheney, Adam Kinzinger, current members of Congress, Jack Smith, you name it, everybody is in danger of the abuse of power. That's what it's like when you live in an authoritarian state. Now, we can add to that, of course, Justice Alito, we are hearing reporting, had a little talk with Trump only hours before Trump filed the emergency appeal with the Supreme Court to halt that sentencing. What's the takeaway from that? Forget what Alito says about it. What's the takeaway, meaning what kind of atmosphere does that create? My parents became political refugees in this country after the Communist Revolution in China. They feared retribution. They were just students, but their families were certainly targets. Every one of my uncles on my father's side served time in jail. They were political prisoners for a time, as well as did my grandfather, who had been a general on the wrong side of that revolution. So mainstream media is going to cover the legal ins and outs of the Trump sentencing, these machinations beforehand. And there are legal ins and outs, but that's not the real problem. The real problem here is that the regime is already here, and we are living in it. That's the takeaway. And it's enough to see it, to address it, and to not let people pretend otherwise. That's what we can do for now. All right, so it's good to see you again. Please keep those comments and replies coming. We try and absorb them and try and make some little changes or address particular issues that you think are important. So I'll talk to you soon.
In collaboration with the Midas Touch Network, we just launched the Legal AF YouTube channel. Help us build this pro-democracy channel where I'll be curating the top stories at the intersection of law and politics. Go to YouTube now and free subscribe at Legal AF MTN. That's at Legal AF MTN.